Thank you everyone for joining and taking the time to be here with us today. I want to welcome you to the global launch of the consultation for IPSASB's first ever sustainability reporting standard. My name is Celine Chan, and I'm a member of the IPSASB staff team based out of Toronto, Canada. I have the pleasure of leading the climate-related disclosures project, and let me tell you, this is a milestone moment for the IPSASB. We're so happy you could be here. Climate change affects everyone, transcending borders and economic boundaries. The rapid progress needed to address climate change requires action from everyone, including public sector and private sector. And this action to be effective requires quality information that sustainability reporting standards specific to the sector's actions are needed. And that's what the IPSASB's climate-related disclosure standard aims to provide. We wouldn't be here today without the support of various organizations, one of which is the World Bank, who supported the IPSASB's sustainability work through funding this first climate-related disclosure standard project. We have with us Arturo Herrera, Global Director for Governance Global Practice at the World Bank, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. Over to you, Arturo.
Thank you, Celine. For the World Bank, it has been really important to be able to partner with IPSAS on this matter. One of our main priorities over the last few years has been the issues related to climate change. But we are very conscious that if we want to measure the progress, how the progress is unfolding, we need to be able to count it properly. The new IPSAS standards are filling a gap that it was incredibly needed. While in the private sector, there has been some sort of progress in terms of incorporating the impact on climate change for other activities. It was something that was needed in the public sector. This is central to our agenda in the institutions, the global department at the World Bank, but it has also been a very, very important part of our long-term relationship with IPSAS. We look forward to keep working with you on this and other matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Arturo, and thank you to the many colleagues at the World Bank who have and continue to support the work of the IPSASB. You can learn more about the proposals of the draft standard on our website, but now let's hear more from the experts. To discuss the importance of these disclosures and the need for comparable information across public and private sectors, I want to pass it over to London, where Owen Mapley, Chief Executive of CIPFA, is leading an all-star panel discussion between Ian Carruthers, the chair of the IPSASB, and Sue Lloyd, Vice Chair at the International Sustainability Standards Board, and Lee White, the CEO at the International Federation of Accountants.
So kick off with a couple of questions from the stage, but we've then got some time for audience questions. So do be thinking about questions that you would like to ask our fantastic panel. So let's start by talking about the role that the public sector can play in addressing climate change, but also the role that capital markets can play. So Ian, for to kick us off.
Okay. I think by way of context, I think you've already set the scene in terms of the fact that we're all in this together. That's different jurisdictions around the world. It's public, private, not-for-profit, household sectors. And there's a lot to actually do. And frankly, it's going to cost, I think. We know it's a big change program. And that's where, yes, governments can mobilize resources. And absolutely, I think, then managing their activities is going to be really important, whether that's the way that they manage their budgets, the way in which they manage their day-to-day activities, particularly being really clear about what they're trying to achieve in terms of climate change, what outputs they're trying to deliver, what outcomes they're trying to deliver. There's a role absolutely there for not only strong guidance at national level, but the international groups like the OECD Collaborative, Paris Collaborative on Green Budgeting, really actually spreading best practice. I think then government's going to need to be accountable for that, hence international standards like the International Public Sector Accounting Standards on the financial reporting side, and the key role of supreme audit institutions. So I think all of those have a part to play in strengthening public financial management. So really making sure that governments actually deliver efficiently on this. But we know that their finances are also stretched already after the pandemic. You've seen debt levels rise, a lot of additional pressures coming through with aging populations and all those kinds of things. So in terms of this challenge, and everybody knows this is a challenge and it's going to require investment, I think that's where you see the role of the capital markets coming in. And already, as I mentioned, that statistic, about 40% of the $100 trillion global bond market, governments are significant players, but this is going to be an area where they really actually need to be able to be accountable, comparable, in order to lever in the additional finance that's going to be needed. And I think probably there's going to need to be almost a bit of a mindset shift, actually, because certainly when you hear people talking about sustainability reporting, it tends to be, oh, look, it's another reporting burden that's coming down the tracks, instead of actually, this is a way of actually enabling me to actually get the investment into my jurisdiction that's actually needed. So it's actually something positive, and actually then it's a way of showcasing the way in which you're actually doing a good job in terms of managing those resources, both generated within the jurisdiction and through the capital markets, in terms of delivering real change. And I think that's going to become really important.
So you can hear me? Yes, great. So firstly, I should say really huge congratulations to the IPSASB for moving so quickly to get this exposure draft out. I know very much how much work goes into that. Well done. So from our side, I think we are thrilled that you have taken the step of building on S2 as a basis for much of the reporting here. And for me, it really fills a really important part of the jigsaw. So if I think about what our role is at the International Sustainability Standards Board, we want to make sure that investors have got the information they need to make informed decisions and to really understand how sustainability-related risks and opportunities, including climate, are going to affect those that they're going to invest in. And so investors need information to understand how to price risk and to make their capital allocation decisions. And as Ian rightly says, this is an opportunity really for the public sector to explain how they're managing those risks and what opportunities and what they're doing about climate that can attract investment and attract capital. And so by having this type of disclosure for those public sector issuers, whether they are sort of sovereign entities or other public sector entities who are just such big parts of the capital markets and thus such a huge focus for investors, we'll equip those entities with being able to have those conversations with investors to make them feel confident that they understand how a particular issuer is managing climate risks, what their climate opportunities are, and to make their decisions about, do they put their money here, do they put their money in the private sector, and are there specific sort of climate funding opportunities that they can look for. And so it's really just an important piece of what the overall picture is that investors need to make these informed allocation decisions.
Good morning. Owen, thank you to CIPFA and to ICAW for hosting this event. Colleagues, the first thing I've got to say is, a few years ago, if we all thought we'd be sitting in this room today and recognising what a wonderful milestone, genuinely important milestone for the IPSASB to have this released today, I would have thought we'd be here. But also to think with the ISSB having already issued S1 and S2, it's remarkable achievement. So well done to both of you for your leadership and to the boards for achieving what you've been able to do in such a short period of time, but always with great rigour. And I think the 120 days is the right position for your consultation period. So just to add a little bit to the question, for me, climate is a global issue and needs a global response. And so the fantastic work of the ISSB, as Sue has just described, is addressing the private sector, and in a way for Ian and the IPSASB to come through completes it for the public sector, notwithstanding the overlap between both. It will just lead to better decision making, and therefore the government will also, governments, be able to provide their narrative on the outcomes they're actually providing through their actions as well. So for me, what a wonderful milestone today, and look forward to what responses we need to encourage all the responses to come in to make sure that the IPSASB produces the very best standard. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And as we heard in those introductory comments, there's clearly huge interplay and interface between public and private sectors being to work in partnership on these issues. And as we've heard, the work for this exposure draft builds on the framework that was published at the global baseline through ISSB. So wanting consistency, but also needs to be specific to public sector issues. Can you just tell us a bit more about how this work is built on that baseline?
Sure, maybe we'll start from me, if that's okay, Ian, and talk a little bit about what I think it means to build from the baseline and what sort of benefits does that bring, because I think it brings some very real benefits. So, as Ian said in his introduction, the exposure draft builds on S2 when it comes to reporting on the sort of operating part of the public sector business. And it means that, like us and S2, where we decided not to start with a clean sheet of paper, the IPSASB document benefits from building from established practice and established frameworks. We started with the heritage of the TCFD recommendations and the SASB standards and built from that, and in turn, the IPSASB benefits from building from that known base as well. And so I think that's the first important benefit. But then it brings up another couple of really important benefits, I think, as a consequence. The first is this comparability point, which I'm going to keep coming back to because that's what I talk about day in, day out, so you're going to benefit from that as well, I'm sorry, is that investors make choices between different issuers, different investment opportunities, and that's not just across the private sector, that's public sector investments and private sector investments. And being able to compare on a like-for-like basis what the public sector is saying about how they're managing climate risks and opportunities means that they can be considered side by side when investors make their capital allocation decisions. So that's super, super important for investors and for issuers. I think the other really super important benefit of this is that everybody, everywhere you go at the moment, talks about data. How do we get the data we need for this reporting? And by having more and more people providing information which is about the same metrics and information, it helps with this flow of information that we all need for this reporting. And the simple example I'll give you here, why it's super important to me that the IPSASB has built on S2 is to take, everybody's favourite greenhouse gas emissions as the example. We're asking companies all around the world to provide information about Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, and we know that's not a straightforward exercise. But guess what? Your Scope 3 emissions are somebody else's Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And having the public sector reporting on that helps that flow of information for everybody else. And so having as complete a jigsaw as possible just helps everybody. So thank you for the IPSASB for helping us all with that.
So building off that comment, I think one of the challenges that we face as an international standard sector is that the public sector around the world is not homogeneous. You have different activities performed at different levels by different types of bodies, We know that some activities are performed by the public sector, some are performed by private sector, some by sort of NGOs and so on. So I think, again, that points to actually there is no, providing you can actually get the principles right, there is no reason why those principles can't be applied across the economy. And I think that points about, somebody else's Stoke 3, that's your Stoke 1 and 2. Everybody's going to be in and out of each other's value chain. So I think there's huge benefits then, not only in terms of data exchange, but just in terms of skills, systems, and so on. Interchangeability, interoperability, all of those things I think are actually facilitated by this approach. Now, having said that, at the top level, we know that there will be more guidance required. I think, as Sue mentions, ISSB built off existing guidance, not only TCFD, but also the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, the SASB guidance. That focuses on private sector. So some of that can be read across to the public sector, but we know that that's going to be an area where we need to provide more help for people going forwards. And similarly, I think your point about this sort of, it's this data ecosystem which is going to be really important. So, we're having conversations, with the net zero, net zero data public utility. I always forget that. Yeah, so many more acronyms. But anyway, actually to get this data out on a consistent basis into the public. And so, I know they primarily focus more from a market's point of view, but actually if that data is available then on public sector, again, I think that's really important. And talking to colleagues in the statistical community about how can they use this information, because just having estimation is not really good enough. You need to know that the levers that are being pulled at the top are actually having an influence and changes happening at the bottom. So I think that all of those areas are going to be really important, and then linking in with consistently increasing the focus on outputs and outcomes, and that being reflected in terms of public financial management systems, improvements in assurance. There's a whole raft of things that need to go on here, and that's really where, not being different for the sake of being different, but building off that global baseline, I think is going to be really important.
Sure, if I've got this one. No matter, I'll talk very loudly. Owen, just to add a little bit more to what Sue and Ian have said, if I think about talent, the approach that's been adopted here by the IPSASB, I think will ultimately just lead to a better flow of talent between the public and the private sector. And at times, and I'm very proud my career has served both sectors over time, but it just feels to me that the way this has been neatly structured and brought together, the IPSASB approach building upon the ISSB, just allows a sense of no walls, no borders, no limitations to how talented professional accountants will operate between both the private and the public sector. And that's a good outcome. That's a fantastic outcome. And importantly as well, it means that we are all working together in a clear response, no matter whether you're private or the public sector, and professional accountants will be central right at the heart of the success, not just in reporting and assurance, but in the reshaping of the business models, the opportunities and the risks.
Thank you. I completely endorse that. And I too have moved across private and public sector, as so many people do, as non-linear careers now. But also, as importantly, as we've already said, the response to climate change has to be a whole economy response, a whole global response, both public and private sectors working together. So that level of consistency and understanding is so crucial when this type of reporting is so new for everybody. So I absolutely endorse that, Matt. And to see if there's any questions from the floor that we want to ask our panel. If I can ask you to introduce yourself, and we've got a mic that Ian can bring.
Thanks very much. So, colleagues, Caroline Albiati, Chairman and Chief Finance Officer at the City of London Corporation. So, home turf, very convenient. So, my question is around how the standards will be adopted in the various jurisdictions. So, we know from the experience of the public sector, the accounting standards, but for instance, that is still an old-age project within the European Union. So the value that this has, and I agree with you completely. If we do what we monitor, we do what we measure. If we do not do this, we are not going to get there. But how long do you think it will take for the globe to adopt the international standards? And what can be done in this space, I suppose, is the next question to assess. Thank you.
Thank you. And so here, you set out your twisty roadmap. Just give us a sense of what happens after the 12-week period the exposure is over.
So I think it's not necessarily after the exposure period is over. We know there are already governments that are keen to work with us, and actually we're encouraging them, now the guidance is actually out, to actually work with us as pilots, because we want that practical input to finalising the guidance. So yes, the guidance will be available, we're intending by the end of next year. Then the decision is going to be very much for jurisdictions. As with all international standards, you can't mandate the application of the standard. It has to be a jurisdictional decision. And I think that's where awareness of actually there are now tools for government to be accountable, to help raise money from the capital markets. I think that's going to be a really powerful driver. And again, I think that's where, if you like, I think we need the profession to help in that, in terms of really changing that perception that this is, a regulatory imposition. It's actually, this can really help us actually portray what we're doing and get the funding in. And I hope if we can get that kind of difference of approach, actually that will move this quite quickly. It doesn't necessarily depend on having accrual-based reporting in place already. I think that helps in terms of public financial management, but you can still move forward on this even if you're reporting on a cash basis. So to your point, Caroline, because this is a really urgent issue, I would hope that the uptake is pretty rapid, not the sort of rather slow change that we've seen on the transition to accrual reporting. So, yes, we want these standards used quickly. I would hope we've got, really solid body of governments using these, let's say, at the latest in 10 years' time, and I would hope earlier than that.
Thank you. Caroline, I just had a little aspect to it, and I have mentioned this to Ian before, but for those jurisdictions that have perhaps been a bit slower in adoption on the financial reporting side, I think the freshness and the enthusiasm we're responding in the right needs of regarding climate may actually bring some of those jurisdictions more quickly along who have been a little bit more delayed on financial reporting. So it's not only just the picking up of the climate disclosures, but you might find the benefit also that it speeds up on the financial reporting side.
And Ken, then things like
Just a couple of things. I think I'd just say that I think the investor voice will be important here. So investors saying they need this information, a critical public sector, I think will be an important catalyst here. So that would be something I'd keep an eye on. I think the other thing that I've really learned in my discussions with companies is to Ian's point about the opportunity side of things, attracting capital. I think that's really important. But also the other thing that a lot of companies talk about is once you look at what's required here, and it really requires you to think deeply about, okay, what are my physical climate risks? What are my transition risks? What am I going to have to change, and what are the consequences? There's real benefits for governance and strategy for an organisation to think about this and then to report on it. And I think looking at that sort of business benefit of it as well is something I'd really encourage us to be talking to public sector entities about.
Thank you. I think there were a couple more in the audience, so Alison.
Hi, thank you. Alison Ring, Director of Public Sector and Tax at the ICW.
So a couple of questions, really. And I think it's great that this ED is built on the substantive work already done, I think, and that pace. I think that's really good to know. So my first question is about assurance. I think, if we talk about investment, etc., how, you said you were working with the SAIs. I think it's really important to bring them in to add the credibility to the, because I would just be really interested in what work you're doing with the SAIs. And the other question, you're very keen to about the outcomes of a climate-related policy programme. Now, just thinking very sort of locally, quite often work done in one area of government has an impact on another area of government. Does that come through in the ED? How one might practically report on that, if you see what I mean? Thank you.
Hi, I might just tackle the first one very, very quickly. Fully agree with you about the engagement around assurance and the Auditor Generals. And IFAC we see INTERSCI as one of our key partners. And if we think in a way that the great work that IOSCO did in conjunction with the ISSB leading to the endorsement, it's a different relationship, but not hugely different. And so the relationship with INTERSCI is working closely with them about how they introduce, implement and use and approach assurance to the reporting in the public sector. It will also have a capacity building angle as well through our Mosaic program. So that would be the two, but rest assured, very much top priority for us.
Sí.
Yeah, I mean, the points about outcomes, I think, is really interesting, and there's been quite a lot of debate within the board as we've moved through this process, because, and you can see this if you look at the SDGs, it's perfectly possible to move forward with one of the SDGs and then to move backwards on another one. So this is not a straightforward issue at all. And I think that how do you actually focus on what you're trying to achieve on climate is really, has been one of the things that preoccupied us, because, people quite rightly said, well, a lot of programs have an impact on climate. And so, you'll see a focus on those programs primarily designed to deliver on climate change. And that, we have an alternative view there that maybe we should be going more widely, but I think what we're trying to do is say, look, this is just going to be really important in terms of how you tell your story and how you could focus on a lot of things. That's not going to help you in terms of, back to Sue's point about how are you managing your work to, address climate change. And then I think it is very much about, okay, let's just focus on those outcomes. Let's not try and make this perfect. I think again, ISSB have said this. It really is about starting to make a difference. And I think what we've tried to do is set out a way that we think practically will enable governments to move forward in this area, and then practice will evolve. I think we've accepted that, ISSB has accepted that, but it's getting started. I think that's the broad point.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, we'll take maybe a couple more and then we'll wrap up. There's a chance for that.
Hi, it's Nigel Stage-Johnson. I'm Director of Audit and Corporate Reporting at ICSB. It's a huge and exciting endeavour, so just congratulations to everybody on that. It's great to see the progress. Just had a few questions. I'm sure the answers are obvious to those involved. But firstly, I wonder what you're thinking a successful exposure draft consultation period looks like. The number of or type of jurisdictions that you feel need to respond in order to make this a success, to give it legitimacy, and the types of stakeholders you need to hear from, is it audit bodies or investors particularly, and just what you have in terms of expectations around that, and what can be done by all players in the system to try and encourage more engagement from those types of investors or those particular jurisdictions. And secondly, it's sort of building on previous questions a little bit, but what you think a successful outcome would be over the next 5 to 10 years, say. Are you equally happy in a way with adoption of this standard It's just the standard for monthly IPSASB suite by government, so some sort of standalone basis, or are you happy with this standard being taken and used to build national requirements or regimes rather than adopting it per se, or is it word for word adoption of the standard that really is the really the objective lines? Thank you.
Well, I think those are two really good questions. I mean, I think for us, success with this consultation would be that we get a very broad range of responses back in. So yes, we want, if you like, our traditional core audience in terms of governments, supreme audit institutions, professional bodies, academia to engage. But we really want to go out further than that. So, you know, we would like policy professionals in governments to engage. We particularly want the markets to engage. I think, you know, hitherto that's not really been a very strong voice in our work. And I think that, you know, if I'm speaking personally, and we can really get strong input from the market's perspective, that would be real success as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we saw this with the consultation paper that we got. You know, about half of our written responses were actually from constituents in other, you know, sort of walks of life outside our normal respondents. So I think that's really what I'm looking for: success, looking like, and good quality responses that the board can then use in finalising the guidance. So, you know, it's never about quantity, although that's nice. I think it's about quality and how they approach the issue. That's going to be really important. And your second question, just prompt me on that. Word for word adoption, yeah. I can get into trouble on this because, I mean, if you like, I mean, I know it's super important in terms of the IFRS Foundation. You know, and a lot of wrangling going into, you know, we want you to use standards directly. And yes, I would like people to use the standards directly because I think then that gives that, you know, that interoperability that we're all looking for. But I'm also a realist, and certainly if I look at the financial reporting side, I've always thought it's more important that governments are on a crawl rather than they're necessarily using our standards directly. I think there's an opportunity here because actually if you're getting guidance and there is none, why would you move away from the international standards when really one of the reasons for doing it is to be comparable? So I think this is an opportunity for a reset. And to move forward on a global basis. And so you might want to comment. So I know fragmentation has been one of the challenges.
You know me well. I do want to comment. I'll look at it through the sort of way that we're thinking about it, Nigel, on the ISSB side of things. So if you think about the International Accounting Standards Board, that I used to be part of, it's been very much a journey of using the actual standards and the actual words in the standards. From the ISSB's perspective, it's slightly different, partly because firstly we've always talked about the likelihood that jurisdictions might choose to add additional disclosures. So we've talked about this building blocks approach. So there may be additional information you need in a jurisdiction, and we're okay with that as long as you can still see the global baseline. But over and above that, we talk about adoption or other use of the ISSB standards very intentionally at the IFRS Foundation, followed in fact from the IOSCO endorsement. And what does that mean? It means what we're really focused on is as long as a jurisdiction is asking for the information which would be aligned with the information that we're asking for, so that it's functionally aligned is the term that we use, then that's okay with us. And so it's really how alike are the disclosures that are being asked for. And that's because we know that in some jurisdictions like Japan, for example, who are on a very good path towards use of the ISSB standards, they're writing those standards in Japanese and in a particular format that they need for regulation in Japan. And what we keep asking is, but are you requiring the same disclosures to be provided? And that's what we're testing against. And so I think here that, you know, hopefully that would be a similar focus.
Can I just add one point which goes to your points about, you know, in a sense, we've taken the same gap agnostic approach that the ISSB has taken. So you don't have to be applying international public sector accounting standards to use international, the IPSASB sustainability reporting standards. And actually that was one of the key drivers of actually saying, no, this is a separate guidance series. It's not just IPSAS. To enable that, it really is public interest. We need to move forward. So we're taking that approach.
Just to add to that from my perspective in CIPFA, we work with jurisdictions all over the world in terms of improving public financial management, and we can see that there's a huge range of status or evolution of reporting. And I think it's fantastic that we get this consistency, but there's also a message of just do more. This is such an important area. And as each country develops their approach to reporting, to have a standard approach to move towards, I think will be super beneficial wherever they are in their journey towards adoption of international standards in use of, course, accounting full stop. So I think wherever you are on that roadmap, having a consistent global standard is super beneficial. Then we've got time for one last question. I've got several hands. So let me go to the lady at the front here in the green jacket.
Thank you very much. I'm Karen Sanderson. I'm the forthcoming IPSASB board member and also the technical director of the forthcoming International Accounting Standard for Non-Profits. Lots of forthcomings in there. Work in progress and many things are. I just wanted to pick up on the fragmentation point because I recall conversations with colleagues in the public sector a couple of years ago where there was a lot of confusion because there was so much discourse around this, so many different bodies all producing stuff. So it's amazing that we're now in a situation where there are standards or exposure drafts across the private and public sectors that have brought so much of that together. One thing that we haven't mentioned so far is about GRI. And it would be really useful to understand how GRI have been involved in the development of the exposure draft from the public sector and how you see that going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think that's a good point because, yes, colleagues from GRI have been with us all the way through the journey. And I think it has actually led us to some quite deep thinking about which only I can say as a standard assessor on the difference between impacts and outcomes, because obviously impacts are fundamental to the GRI's approach, and I think that's a very broad approach. And when we started looking at this through the lens of our conceptual framework, we said, well, look, this is really, in terms of accountability, it's about accountability, it's about decision making, and actually therefore being clear on what that body is actually trying to deliver and how it's set itself up to actually deliver that. And that's really what led us to say, well, actually, we think we're focusing on outcomes, outputs and outcomes. I think that's consistent then with other sorts of guidance like integrated reporting as well. When you look at the bridge then, actually, those are direct impacts. So we're not picking up that broader view on impacts and all the sort of outside in, inside out, all of that kind of thing. But it is consistent with that. And I think that, actually being clear about it's consistent, but it's not the whole story. I think that's really important. And certainly, we want to continue to work with GRI because obviously they've got a lot of very good experience. And, certainly in thinking about what might be the next project, for example, looking at biodiversity, a lot of very useful thinking. So the more that we can get that interoperability, build those bridges, I think that's really important.
Thank you. I think that draws us to a close for the Q&A. I just want to close the panel discussion by inviting each of our panelists to give the final thoughts. And maybe if you can kick us off, Sil, with you've been through this in your work in the private sector side of this. So any advice?
Be prepared for lots of feedback would be my first advice. I think I would anticipate that, which is a good thing, but it's a lot to digest. What an opportunity to give advice to another standard setter.
So a couple of things. I think a few people have already raised the temptation to depart from the global baseline. I'm sure will come up. Be careful to think about the benefits of that relative to the cost of the friction in the system that creates. That would be one thing. I think the other thing that we got most of our feedback on, where we had to think the most deeply in our deliberations, was really being aware of what a huge change in reporting this is for everybody, even those who have done sustainability reporting in the past. This type of reporting is new. And so paying attention to what you hear about proportionality and sort of pace is probably something to be ready for and prepared for. And we'll be very happy to chat to you about that, given our experience. And I think the last thing is, I think, we're thrilled that you've got the ISSB's S2 as the global baseline for the sort of operational piece. But you've got quite a novel piece on the policy side. So I think making sure people understand what that is and sort of thinking about the application of that's going to be super important for you, because you're a new territory there. So I think that will be an interesting area of focus for you in your deliberations.
Thank you, Sue. And I think, that just underlines actually, I think to get to this point, we've had a lot of help and advice from ISSB, from GRI, and also national standards assessors. So at Springfield from the Treasury in the UK was one of the inputs to our technical working group compliance. But, we need this dialogue to go out much more broadly, because intentionally, these are the stakes in the ground, and this is the point in time where we need input from all of those other communities, and I think that's the really important thing, is just encouraging everybody to talk to us. We're very happy to come out to events, to support discussions, whatever's appropriate. And hopefully that will generate a lot of feedback. But I think, particularly as you said, Sue, there on public policy programs, yes, that's you. That is you thinking. So we need feedback on that. So I think, thank you very much to everyone, this audience included, that's got us this far. And really, I think we're looking forward to the next stage. One other thing I would say before closing is, a week or so ago, we also published the exposure draft of the new financial reporting standard on natural resources. Now, we're not expecting that will actually allow governments really to recognise a lot more in their balance sheets. I think what it does do, though, is it starts to get them into disclosure of much more of natural resources, particularly assets held for conservation. And I think that becomes much more important as debate starts to move then into biodiversity and other areas like that. So I would encourage people to respond to that as well, to have a look at that and think about that in the context of that broader, and I'll use the word ecosystem. So I think, please do respond, and we'll leave you this is going to want to, yes, there you got the response details.
Thank you, Owen. Just a couple of points. First, to you, Ian, IFAC will be with your board, respecting your independence, but will be shoulder to shoulder with your board as you move through this next phase. We will use all of our communication channels, including myself, at every opportunity to encourage responses, big or small, whichever way they come in. But overall, our support will be strong. We will harness all of the global professional accounting profession to be part of the, first of all, the responses, but then the implementation and the adoption, as we will always continue to do with the ISSB as well. And the final point would be just, it's one of these moments, colleagues, for both standard setters, that if you just pause and think about the remarkable achievements, because they're so busy, their days, weeks and months move so quickly, it's only like an opportunity like this event that you've hosted, that we actually get to pause for a few seconds to go, actually, you know what, it's been pretty good.
Absolutely, what a great place to finish, Tony. We all agree this is a landmark event for the planet, for global reporting. So delighted to be able to be here today. As you know, CIPFA and ICAW work in a close strategic partnership, so we're thrilled to be able to host this event today. So huge congratulations to everybody involved at IPSASB and ISSB, at IFAC, CIPFA, ICAW, who've all come together to make this happen. And now is our opportunity to spread the word. You can see the link there. It's really important that we get as many contributions as possible to this exposure draft. And we look forward to working together in the weeks and months ahead. So thank you all to the audience, and that draws to a close and submit.
Thank you, Owen, Ian, Sue, and Lee, for a fantastic discussion and the great questions from the audience. Also, thank you to CIPFA and ICAW for hosting at Chartered Accountants Hall. As we wrap up today's event, don't forget, we want to hear from you. Your input will shape the final standard. Learning more about the draft standard and submitting feedback is easy. Just visit our website, bookmark it, talk about it, share it with others, and send us your comments on the proposed standard by February 28th, 2025. Thank you again to everyone for joining. We very much look forward to hearing from you.